Sometimes the hardest miles we ride are the ones leading us back home. Sometimes what we thought was lost forever finds us exactly when we need it most. Beau McCrae is 62, his hands weathered rough from riding fence lines for a ranch that barely pays him. His wife passed 3 years ago. His daughter hasn't spoken to him since the funeral. All he has left is a weathered cabin and the loneliness that settles deep into his bones. Tonight, 3 shivering dogs wait on his porch. Duke, Nellie, and Scout, his late wife's beloved pups given away when grief made caring impossible. They've returned. Inside his cabin lies something that will break this cowboy. What did Beau find? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The winter sun hung low and weak over the Montana prairie, casting long shadows across dead grass that crunched beneath his horse's hooves. Beau McCrae sat deep in his saddle, the kind of sitting a man does when his bones ache clear through and the cold has settled into joints that remember every hard year. His breath came out in small clouds, mingling with the frost that had started forming on his collar. 62 years old, and he felt every single one of them today. The ride back from Crossfield Ranch took him past what used to be the Morrison place, then the Chen family's spread, both abandoned now. Broken fences tilted at sad angles. A barn door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind, its hinges screaming like something alive and in pain. This whole stretch of country was dying slow, the way a man dies when he loses the will to keep fighting. Young folks moved to cities. Old folks held on until they couldn't anymore. Beau understood that kind of holding on better than most. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Rosie, knew the way home without guidance. She'd made this trip 1,000 times. Beau let his mind wander as they moved across the familiar landscape, though his thoughts never wandered far from the same worn paths they'd traveled for 3 years now. 3 years since Sarah died? 3 years since his world ended and somehow kept going anyway. The town of Mercer's Bend appeared on the horizon, such as it was. Population signs still read 342, though Beau figured it was closer to 280 these days. Main Street ran 4 blocks, half the storefronts empty with soap-streaked windows. The hardware store had closed last spring. The diner stayed open because old Martha Hennessy was too stubborn to quit, not because it made any money. The general store, the post office, the grain elevator, and Paulson's bar comprised most of what remained. There was still a church, still a school, though the school might not make it another year, with only 17 children left in the whole county. Beau rode past without stopping. He'd need supplies soon, but not tonight. Tonight, he just wanted to get home, heat up something from a can, and sit in his chair until sleep took him. Maybe listen to the radio if the batteries held out. That was his life now, stripped down to basics, to the simple mechanics of staying alive without much reason for it. His property sat 2 miles beyond town, a 40-acre parcel that backed up against Bureau of Land Management territory. The cabin was small, built by Sarah's grandfather in 1947, added onto twice over the decades, but never quite big enough to be called spacious. Wood siding weathered to grey, metal roof that pinged when it rained, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, the boards worn smooth from years of boots crossing them. Sarah used to keep flower boxes on that porch, geraniums mostly, bright red ones that she'd fuss over every evening. She'd stand there with her watering can, talking to those flowers like they were children. Beau could see her so clearly sometimes it hurt to breathe. The way her hair caught the light, the sound of her humming while she worked. The dogs at her feet, always at her feet, following her like she was the sun, and they were planets bound to orbit. The dogs. Duke, Nellie, and Scout. Duke was the oldest, a golden retriever with a graying muzzle even back then. Sarah had found him as a pup, half-starved and limping beside the highway into town. She'd brought him home, despite Beau's protests about another mouth to feed. Duke proved his worth 100 times over, good with livestock, better with people. The kind of dog that seemed to understand human speech if you talked to him long enough. Nellie came next. A border collie mix with mismatched eyes, one blue and one brown. Sharp as a tack, that dog. Sarah trained her to help with the small flock of sheep they kept, back when Bo still ran livestock of his own instead of just working other men's ranches. Nellie would round up those sheep with a focused intensity that bordered on artistic. Sarah loved to watch her work. Scout was the surprise, the runt of an unwanted litter that someone had dumped at the church one Sunday. Smaller than the others, part terrier, part mystery, all heart. Sarah named him Scout because he was always exploring, always finding things, always nosing into business that wasn't quite his. That dog had made Sarah laugh more than anything else in the world. After she died, Bo tried to keep them. He honestly tried. But the grief had swallowed him whole, and caring for 3 dogs felt like trying to climb a mountain with broken legs. He couldn't feed them properly, couldn't give them attention, could barely feed himself. So he'd found homes for them, good homes, families that promised they'd be loved. Giving them away had felt like cutting off pieces of his own body. Each one he handed over, he lost another part of Sarah. But he'd told himself it was the right thing, the responsible thing. Dogs deserved better than a broken old man who could barely function. That was 2 years ago. Bo hadn't seen them since. He'd been working at Crossfield Ranch for 18 months now. Frank Crossfield was a decent man, owned 3,000 acres, and ran about 500 head of cattle. He'd given Bo steady work when nobody else would, knowing Bo's reputation for showing up drunk or not at all in those first months after Sarah's death. Frank had been patient, had let Bo work through it, and Bo had eventually straightened himself out enough to be reliable again. The work was hard. Riding fence lines in all weather, checking water sources, moving cattle, fixing what broke, maintaining what hadn't broken yet. Ranch work never ended, especially for an outfit trying to make it in country where margins were thin and luck was thinner. Frank paid fair, though fair wasn't much these days. Enough for beans and bread, and the mortgage on the cabin. Enough to keep the lights on most months. Bo worked alone mostly, which suited him fine. The other hands were younger, full of talk about things Bo didn't care about. They respected his skill, but gave him space, sensing maybe that he wasn't a man who wanted company. He'd eat his lunch apart from them, ride home at day's end without lingering. Frank understood. Frank had lost his own wife years back. There was a kinship in shared grief, even unspoken. As Rosie climbed the gentle rise toward his property, Bo noticed the light was wrong. The winter sun was setting, yes, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Sarah would have called magnificent. But there was something else, something that made him sit up straighter in the saddle and narrow his eyes. Movement on his porch. His heart kicked harder in his chest. In 3 years, living out here alone, he'd never come home to find anything on that porch but weather and solitude. No visitors. No packages. Nobody had reason to come all the way out here. He kept his hand near the rifle in his saddle scabbard, not drawing it but ready. Plenty of desperate folks in desperate times, and a lone cabin made an easy target. Rosie sensed his tension and slowed her pace. Bo let her, giving himself time to see clearly as the distance closed. Not a person, animals. 3 of them, sitting in a cluster near his door. His vision wasn't what it used to be, but as he got closer, shapes resolved into something that made his breath catch. Dogs, 3 dogs. They watched him approach without barking, without moving, just sitting there like they'd been waiting a long time. The light was fading fast now, but Bo could make out details. The size of them, the way they held themselves, the way one of them tilted its head just so. No, it couldn't be. Bo dismounted 20 yards from the porch, his knees nearly buckling as his boots hit frozen ground. He tied Rosie to the rail with shaking hands, then walked slowly forward. The dogs remained motionless, watching him, waiting. Duke, Nellie, Scout, he knew them. Even after 2 years, even in the dim light, he knew them like he knew his own reflection. Duke's particular way of sitting with one paw tucked under. Nellie's mismatched eyes catching the last rays of sun. Scout's small frame dwarfed by the other 2 but holding his ground. They were here, on his porch, shivering in the cold. Bo stopped at the bottom step, unable to move further. His throat had closed up. His eyes burned. These dogs, Sarah's dogs, the dogs he'd given away because he couldn't bear to look at them, had somehow found their way back to him. Duke stood first, aged noticeably since Bo had last seen him. His muzzle was nearly white now. He moved stiffly, arthritis in his hips visible in each careful step. But his tail wagged slow and steady, and his eyes held recognition and something else. Something that looked like relief. Then Nellie, still sharp and alert but thinner than she should be, her coat matted with mud and burrs. She approached cautiously, as if unsure of her welcome, those strange, mismatched eyes fixed on Bo's face. Scout came last, shaking from cold or emotion or both, his small body quivering as he crossed the porch boards. He'd always been Sarah's shadow, the one who slept curled against her side every night. Bo sank down onto the step, and the dogs came to him. Duke pressed his graying head against Bo's chest. Nellie leaned into his side. Scout climbed right into his lap, something he hadn't done since he was a pup. Bo wrapped his arms around them, feeling the cold in their fur, the ridge of ribs that shouldn't be so prominent, the desperate way they pressed close. He cried then, great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, somewhere he'd locked away 3 years ago. The dogs stayed with him, patient and steady, like they understood, like they'd traveled through their own kind of grief to get here. When he could finally breathe again, Bo looked at each of them more carefully. They'd been through something. Duke had a healed scar across his shoulder. Nellie's paws were worn and cracked. Scout's coat was dull, lacking the shine of good health. But they were alive. They'd survived whatever had brought them here. The porch boards creaked as Bo stood, dogs moving with him like they were attached. He reached for the door, expecting it to be locked as he'd left it. But the knob turned easily in his hand, unlocked. His heart jumped again, the fear from earlier returning. Had someone broken in? He pushed the door open slowly. The cabin was dark inside, but even in the dimness he could see that things had been disturbed. Not ransacked, arranged. There was a box on his kitchen table that hadn't been there this morning. His old armchair had been moved slightly. Something sat on the arm of the chair, catching what little light remained. Bo fumbled for the lamp, his hands clumsy with cold and emotion. The match struck bright and sharp, and he lit the wick, adjusting it until warm yellow light filled the small front room. The box on the table was cardboard, sturdy, the kind used for moving. Inside, he could see the tops of canned goods, labels facing up. Green beans, soup, stew, things that would keep things meant to help a man through winter. On the arm of his chair sat a folded quilt, the pattern familiar in a way that made his heart stop. Blue and yellow squares, hand-stitched with embroidered initials in one corner. S.M. Sarah McCrae. This was Sarah's grandmother's quilt, the one Sarah had cherished, the one that had been on their bed for 20 years of marriage. Bo moved closer, reaching out to touch the fabric. It was clean, freshly washed, still holding faint warmth like it had been there recently. Beneath it, tucked carefully into the folds, was an envelope. His name was written on the front in handwriting he recognized immediately. Emma, his daughter. The daughter who hadn't spoken to him since Sarah's funeral. The daughter who'd left that day with words neither of them could take back. The daughter he'd failed somehow, though he wasn't always sure exactly how. Bo picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. The dogs had followed him inside, settling around his feet like they belonged there, like they'd never left. He looked at them, at the quilt, at the box of food, at his daughter's handwriting. For the first time in 3 years, Bo McCrae felt something other than numb emptiness. He felt the stirring of something he'd thought was dead. Hope maybe, or fear, or both mixed together in a way that made his chest tight and his hands shake. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. Inside, 3 dogs breathed steadily in the lamplight. And in his hands, Bo held an envelope that might explain everything or nothing at all. He wasn't sure he was ready to know which. But the dogs were here. The quilt was here. Emma had been here, in his home, leaving things that mattered. Bo sat down in his chair, dogs arranging themselves around him. He ran his thumb over his daughter's handwriting one more time, then carefully, slowly, broke the seal. The paper felt heavy in his hands. heavier than paper should feel. Bo unfolded it slowly, conscious of each crease, each movement deliberate, like he was diffusing something dangerous. The lamplight flickered slightly, making shadows dance across the walls. Duke's breathing was steady at his feet. Nellie had her head resting on his boot. Scout curled tight against his leg. The handwriting was Emma's, careful and measured, the way she'd always written, even as a child. She'd been meticulous that way, planning things out, making sure everything was just so. She'd gotten that from Sarah, that attention to detail, that need for things to make sense. "Dad," it began. Just that one word, and Bo had to stop, had to close his eyes against the sudden sting. 3 years since he'd heard her call him that. 3 years since that terrible day at the cemetery when everything fell apart. He forced his eyes open, forced himself to continue. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you'll understand why I came back, why I brought the dogs, why I left these things for you. Maybe you won't care. Maybe too much has been said or not said for any of this to matter anymore. But I'm going to try anyway because Mom would have wanted me to try." Bo's hand tightened on the paper. Sarah. Of course, Emma would invoke Sarah. Sarah had been the bridge between them always, the one who could smooth over Bo's stubbornness and Emma's quick temper. Without her, they'd collapsed like a building without its foundation. "I've been watching you, Dad. I know that probably sounds strange, maybe even wrong, but I couldn't help it. I've been living in Billings for the past year, working at the hospital there, and every few weeks I'd drive down. I'd park on the ridge past the Morrison place and just watch. I'd see you ride home from Crossfields. I'd see your light come on at night, and I'd wonder if you were okay, if you were eating enough, if you were still drowning in the grief that took you away from me 3 years ago." Bo felt something crack inside his chest. She'd been there, watching him, worrying about him, while he'd assumed she'd written him off completely. He'd been so certain she hated him, so convinced that he'd lost her along with Sarah, that it had never occurred to him she might still care. "The dogs," Emma's letter continued, "I've been tracking them. After you gave them away, I kept tabs on where they went. I told myself I was doing it for Mom, making sure they were okay. But really, I think I was doing it for me. They were the last pieces of her I could hold on to." The paper crinkled in Bo's grip. He smoothed it out carefully, trying to steady himself. "Duke went to the Patterson family, remember? Their farm north of town. They were good to him for about 6 months, but then Jim Patterson died, and May couldn't keep up the place. She sold it and moved to Great Falls to live with her daughter. Duke went with her, but he didn't adjust well to city life. He kept trying to run away. After the 3rd time, May's daughter said it was too much. They couldn't keep him. So they took him to a shelter." Bo's throat closed up. "A shelter. Duke, who'd been loved by Sarah, who'd slept beside their bed every night in a concrete kennel with strangers. I found out and went to get him," Emma wrote. "But by the time I got there, someone had already adopted him. A family named Rodriguez. I tried to track them down, but they'd moved out of state. I lost him for almost a year, Dad. A whole year where I didn't know if he was okay, if he was even alive." Bo looked down at Duke, at his graying muzzle resting peacefully against Bo's shin. Alive, he was alive. But the weight of what he'd been through, what they'd all been through because Bo couldn't handle his own grief, settled heavy on Bo's shoulders. "Nellie," the letter continued, "went to the Henderson Ranch. You remember Tom Henderson runs cattle on the east section. They needed a working dog, and Nellie was perfect for that. But Tom's son got hired on an oil rig up in North Dakota. Tom decided to go with him, try something new. He asked around town if anyone wanted Nellie. No one did. You know how it is. Good working dogs are valuable, but people can't afford extra mouths to feed. Tom was going to take her to the pound, but I heard about it and drove down. I took her myself." Bo's fingers traced the words. Emma had saved them. She'd been out there trying to gather the pieces of what he'd scattered in his grief. Scout ended up with the Mitchells in town. Their older, retired, seemed like a good fit. But Scout, he never settled. He'd howl at night, tear up their yard trying to dig under the fence. Mrs. Mitchell called me last spring. "Yes, Dad, I gave everyone my number, asked them to let me know if there were any problems." She said Scout was depressed. That's the word she used, depressed. She said it was like he was mourning, and they didn't know how to help him. They asked if I could take him. Bo bent forward, elbows on his knees, the letter held tight in both hands. These dogs, Sarah's beloved dogs, had been mourning her too. They'd been lost and confused and grieving, just like him, scattered across the state, separated from each other and from the only home they'd known. So I had them. Dad, all three of them living in my tiny apartment in Billings. And you know what happened? They wouldn't settle there either. They'd stand at the door and whine. They'd stare out the window for hours. Duke stopped eating well. Nellie paced constantly. Scout would curl up in the corner and just shake. Emma's handwriting got shakier here, like her hand had been unsteady as she wrote. It took me months to understand what they were trying to tell me. They wanted to go home, Dad, not to me, not to wherever they'd been sent. They wanted to go home, to the cabin, to the porch where Mom used to sit with them. To you. Bo couldn't see the words anymore. His vision had blurred completely. He wiped his eyes roughly with his free hand, but the tears kept coming. I realized something then. These dogs, they're loyal in a way that defies logic. They remember, they feel loss, and despite everything, despite being given away, despite all the changes and confusion, they still wanted to come back to you. Maybe because you were Mom's, and Mom was theirs, and in some way that means you're theirs too. The lamp hissed softly. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the eaves. The cabin felt warmer somehow, fuller, with the dogs breathing around him. I've been driving down with them the past few weeks, letting them out near the property, seeing if they'd find their way to the cabin on their own. I know that sounds cruel, but I needed to know if this was what they really wanted. Every time, they'd head straight here. They'd sit on your porch and wait, even when you weren't home. I'd wait in my truck down the road, then come collect them after you'd gone to bed. I couldn't let you see me, Dad. I wasn't ready for that. Wasn't ready for whatever would happen between us. Bo's hands were shaking now. She'd been so close so many times, and he'd never known. But last week I couldn't do it anymore. Duke's getting older. The drive is hard on him. And I realized I was being selfish, keeping them from where they needed to be just because I was afraid. So I brought them today. One last time. But this time I left them. I unlocked your door. Sorry about that, but I remembered you keep the spare key under the loose board on the porch. Some things don't change. I left the supplies because I know you don't have much. I left Mom's quilt because I think you need it more than I do. I left the dogs because they're yours, Dad. They always have been. The letter was almost done now. Just a few more lines. I don't expect you to forgive me for the things I said at the funeral. I don't expect you to reach out or even want to see me. But I couldn't keep watching you be alone anymore. I couldn't keep seeing you ride home to an empty cabin night after night. So now you have them back. Take care of them, Dad. They've been through enough. She'd signed it simply. Emma, no love, no your daughter. Just her name. Bo sat there for a long time. The letter in his lap, the dogs around him like a living warmth against the cold that had lived in his bones for 3 years. Emma had been there, watching over him, trying in her own wounded way to give him something back. She'd tracked down these dogs. She'd taken them in when no one else would. She'd brought them home, and she thought he couldn't forgive her. Bo looked at Duke, who was watching him with those patient brown eyes that had seen too much. He looked at Nellie, alert even in rest, those mismatched eyes steady and true. He looked at Scout, small and brave, and shaking slightly even in the warmth of the cabin. These dogs had traveled through their own kind of hell to get back here. They'd been given away, moved around, separated from each other and from everything familiar. And yet they'd kept trying to come home. They'd remembered love, remembered belonging, and they'd refused to give up on it. Bo stood slowly, carefully, his body stiff from the cold ride and the weight of emotion. The dogs stood with him, attentive, waiting. He walked to the kitchen, looked in the box Emma had left. Canned stew on top. He opened it, dumped it into a pot on the stove, lit the burner. While it heated, he found 3 bowls, divided the contents among them. The dogs needed to eat more than he did. He set the bowls on the floor and watched them eat, not ravenously like starving animals, but carefully, gratefully, like they knew this was real. This was home, this was going to last. When they finished, He found old blankets in the closet, the same ones they'd used years ago, still smelling faintly of dog and dust and memory. He spread them near the stove where it was warmest. The dogs settled onto the blankets like they'd never left, curling into familiar positions, sighing contentedly. Bo stood over them, his daughter's letter still crumpled slightly in his hand. Emma thought she needed his forgiveness. But standing there in the lamplight, with 3 dogs who'd fought their way home, with a quilt that held his wife's love stitched into every seam, with the knowledge that his daughter had been watching over him even in her own pain, Bo realized the truth. He needed her forgiveness, and more than that, he needed her to know that he'd never given up on Sarah, that he'd tried everything, spent everything, sacrificed everything to save her. That his failure wasn't from lack of love, but from the simple, brutal limits of what a man can do against death itself. Tomorrow he'd find Emma. Tomorrow he'd tell her everything. Tomorrow he'd start trying to rebuild what grief had torn down. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Bo McCrae wasn't alone. Tonight, he had 3 dogs sleeping peacefully on his floor, and a daughter who cared enough to bring them home. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of winter morning that hurt your lungs when you breathed deep. Bo woke in his chair, stiff and sore, the quilt pulled over him, though he didn't remember doing it. The dogs were awake already, sitting in a patient row near the door, waiting to go out. He let them out, watching from the porch as they investigated the familiar yard with careful interest. Duke moved slowly, that arthritic hitch in his back legs more pronounced in the cold. Nellie circled the property once, then twice, like she was checking borders. Scout stayed close to the porch, looking up at Bo every few seconds as if making sure he was still there. When they came back inside, Bo fed them properly. He had some dried dog food left over from years ago, probably stale, but better than nothing mixed with the canned goods Emma had brought. The dogs ate while Bo made coffee, real coffee, not the weak stuff he'd been rationing. Today felt like a day that deserved decent coffee. While the pot percolated, Bo reread Emma's letter. In the morning light, the words felt different somehow. Less raw, more real. She'd been watching him. The thought kept circling his mind, like Nellie circling the yard. All those nights he'd sat alone in this cabin, drinking sometimes, staring at nothing. She'd been out there on the ridge, worried, caring, unable to bridge the distance between them, but unable to let go completely either. The funeral. He'd tried not to think about that day for 3 years, but Emma's letter had cracked something open. And now the memories flooded back whether he wanted them or not. It had been a grey day, fitting for burying his wife. The whole town had turned out, seemed like. Sarah had been loved. She'd volunteered at the church, helped with the school fundraisers, brought meals to sick neighbors, never met a stray animal she wouldn't try to save. The pastor had said kind things, true things, about a woman whose light had gone out too soon. Bo had stood at the graveside feeling nothing. That was what shocked him most afterward, when he could think about it at all. He'd felt nothing. His wife of 38 years was going into the ground, and he was numb, hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside him and left just the shell standing there in his good suit. Emma had stood beside him, dressed in black, her face pale and tight, with the kind of grief that has nowhere to go. She'd cried during the service. He hadn't, couldn't. The tears were locked somewhere so deep he couldn't reach them even if he'd wanted to. After, back at the cabin, people had brought food. The table had been covered with casseroles and pies and kind words that meant nothing. Emma had stayed, playing hostess because Bo couldn't manage it. She'd thanked people, accepted their condolences, cleaned up after they'd gone. It was late evening when she'd finally confronted him. Most folks had left. Just the 2 of them in the cabin that felt too big and too small all at once. You killed her, Emma had said. Not shouted. That was the terrible part. She'd said it quiet and certain, like she was stating a simple fact. Bo had looked at her, at his 26-year-old daughter with Sarah's eyes and Sarah's determination, and he'd felt something finally. Anger, hot, and sudden and welcome because it was better than the nothing. Don't you dare, he'd said. You waited too. Long. Emma's voice had shaken but held firm. She told you something was wrong 6 months before you finally took her to the doctor. 6 months, Dad. She was tired all the time. Losing weight, in pain. And you kept saying it was nothing. Kept insisting she was fine. That she just needed rest. That she was worrying over nothing. She didn't want to make a fuss. Even as he'd said it, Bo had known how weak it sounded. She didn't want to make a fuss because you hate doctors. You hate asking for help. You hate admitting anything might be wrong, that you can't fix yourself with your own 2 hands. Emma had been crying again, tears streaming down her face. And by the time you finally took her seriously, by the time we got her to Billings, it was stage 4, everywhere, inoperable. They gave her 6 months, and she barely made 3. You think I don't know that? Bo had stood then, his own anger boiling over. You think I don't see that every time I close my eyes? You think I need you to tell me I failed her? Then why are you acting like this? Emma had shouted back, like you're the only one who lost someone. Like your grief is the only grief that matters. She was my mother. I loved her too. And instead of talking about it, instead of dealing with it together, you've shut down completely. You're barely functioning. You've stopped taking care of yourself, stopped taking care of this place, stopped taking care of her dogs. Don't. That word had come out hard as a slap. You gave them away. Emma's voice had dropped back to that terrible quiet. She loved those dogs. They were part of her, part of our family. And you just gave them away like they were nothing. I can't, Bo had started, but Emma had cut him off. You can't what? You can't bear to look at them because they remind you of her? Because they make it real? Well, it is real, Dad. She's gone. And getting rid of every reminder of her won't change that. It just means you're losing everything instead of just losing her. Get out. Bo had said it quiet too, final. Dad, I said get out. You've made it clear what you think of me. You've said your piece. Now leave. Emma had stared at him for a long moment, tears still running down her face, and Bo had seen the exact instant when something inside her gave up. When she decided he wasn't worth fighting for anymore. Fine, she'd said. I'm done. I'm done trying to save you from yourself. I'm done watching you destroy everything Mom built. I'm done. She'd walked out that night and hadn't come back. No calls, no letters, no word for 3 years until yesterday when she'd brought the dogs home and left a note explaining that she'd never really given up at all. Bo poured his coffee, hands steady, though his insides felt like they were being wrung out. He'd been so sure she hated him, so convinced that her words that night were permanent, that the break between them couldn't be mended. He'd used that certainty like armor, had let it justify his isolation, his surrender to grief and solitude. But she'd been watching. She'd been tracking down the dogs, taking them in, bringing them home. She'd left supplies and the quilt and a letter that explained everything. She hadn't given up. Bo walked to the small desk in the corner, the one Sarah had used for her correspondence. He found paper and a pen. His handwriting had never been neat, and his hand shook worse now from age and emotion, but he needed to try. Emma, he wrote, then stopped. What could he say? Where did you even start rebuilding something this broken? Duke appeared at his side, pressing his graying head against Bo's leg. Nellie sat at his feet, patient and watchful. Scout jumped up onto the desk, small enough to fit on the corner, and looked at Bo with eyes that seemed to understand everything. These dogs had found their way home through confusion and separation and loss. They'd remembered love. They'd kept faith, and they'd made it back. Bo looked down at the paper, at his daughter's name written in his clumsy hand, and he thought about what these dogs had taught him just by being here. That sometimes the hardest journey is the one back home. That loyalty means showing up even when it would be easier to give up. That family isn't something you lose permanently unless you choose to stay lost. He set the pen down. A letter wouldn't do it. Words on paper couldn't carry what he needed to say. He needed to see her face, needed to tell her in person about the medical bills and the rejected treatments and the mortgage he'd taken on the cabin trying to save Sarah. Needed to explain that his failure wasn't from not loving enough, but from loving so much that losing her had broken something fundamental inside him. He needed to ask for her forgiveness and to offer his own. Bo stood, decision made. He'd go to town, find out where she was staying. Martha at the general store would know. Martha knew everything in this county, and then he'd drive to Billings if he had to, would track Emma down and say everything that should have been said 3 years ago. But first, he had to take care of the dogs. They'd waited long enough. They deserved consistency, deserved to know this homecoming was real. He found their old leashes hanging on hooks by the door, leather worn soft from years of use. The dogs' tails wagged when they saw them, recognition and anticipation mixed together. Bo clipped them on, awkward at first, the motion unfamiliar after so long. Then he walked them out into the winter morning, taking the path around the property that Sarah used to take every evening. The grass crunched under their feet. The sky stretched huge and pale overhead. The dogs walked close, checking back on him frequently, making sure he was still there. And Bo walked with them, feeling for the first time in 3 years like he might actually be moving forward instead of just standing still in the ruins of his old life. When they got back to the cabin, Bo gave the dogs fresh water, made sure they were settled, then put on his good coat. He'd go to town, he'd find out where Emma was, and then he'd start the hard work of trying to piece his family back together. The dogs watched him from the blankets near the stove as he headed for the door. Duke's tail thumped once against the floor. Nellie's mismatched eyes tracked his movement. Scout made a small sound, not quite a whine, just acknowledgement. "I'll be back," Bo told them. "I promise." And for the first time in a long time, Bo McCrae was making a promise he intended to keep. The drive into town felt longer than usual, though the distance was the same 2 miles it had always been. Bo kept the truck's heater running full blast, but the cold seemed to come from inside him rather than out. Nerves, he supposed, or fear. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Mercer's Bend looked the same as always, in winter light. Quiet streets, handful of trucks parked at the diner. The church steeple rising white against grey sky. Bo drove past Paulson's bar, past the closed hardware store, past the grain elevator that only ran half days now. He parked in front of Carson's general store, the only place in town that stocked everything from groceries to work gloves to gossip. The bell above the door chimed when he entered. The store smelled like it always had, a mix of coffee and sawdust and the faint chemical tang of fertilizer from the back room. Martha Hennessy stood behind the counter, reading glasses perched on her nose, working through invoices. She was 70 if she was a day, sharp as a tack, and had known everyone in this county for longer than most of them had been alive. She looked up when Bo entered, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. Bo realized with a start that he hadn't been in here in almost 2 months. He'd been rationing his supplies, making do, avoiding people. "Bo McCrae," Martha said, setting down her pencil. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Been busy," Bo said, which was a lie, and they both knew it, working out at Crossfield still. "Yes, ma'am." Martha studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "You look different." "Something happened." Bo felt his defenses rise automatically, that old instinct to keep everything private, keep people out. But he'd come here for information, and Martha would spot a deflection from a mile off. Better to give a little to get what he needed. "Dogs came back," he said. Martha's eyebrows went up. "Duke and Nellie and Scout?" "All 3. "Well," Martha processed this, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer. "That's something. Sarah's dogs finding their way home. Emma brought them," Bo said, watching Martha's face carefully. There it was, a flicker of knowledge, of awareness. Martha knew something. "Did she now?" Martha said, not quite a question. She left a note. Said she's been in Billings, working at the hospital there. "Billings is a ways off," Martha said carefully. Bo leaned against the counter, tiredness seeping into his bones. "Martha, I know you know where she is. Everyone knows everything in this town. I need to talk to her. Please." Martha was quiet for a long moment, studying him with the kind of scrutiny that came from decades of reading people. Finally, she sighed. "She's staying at the Sunrise Motel out on Highway 12, Martha said. Has been for about a week. Drives back and forth to Billings for her shifts, but she's been spending her days off here. Don't know why she didn't just come see you directly, but that's between you two, not my business. She's here." Bo's heart kicked. "In town this whole time?" "Room 7, the one at the end." Martha paused. Bo, whatever happened between you two, whatever was said, that girl has been asking about you, worried about you. Sent some supplies out to your place through Tom Willis a few months back. Didn't want you to know they came from her. She's hurting, but she's still caring. You understand what I'm saying?" Bo understood. Emma had been here, had been close enough to visit, but too afraid or too hurt to actually cross that threshold. Instead, she'd been helping from a distance, trying to take care of him without having to face him. "Thank you," Bo said. "You need anything else while you're here?" Martha asked. "Dog food? You'll need proper food for those dogs." Bo hadn't even thought about it, but Martha was right. "Yeah, dog food. Whatever you have." Martha moved to the back, returning with 2 large bags. "This should last you a couple of weeks. Duke's getting older. Might want to get him on senior formula next time. Easier on his digestion." Bo paid for the food, surprised by how much cash Martha charged him. Or rather, how little. She was giving him a discount, he realized. One more kindness in a day that was shaping up to be full of them. "Martha," he said as he hefted the bags. "You said Emma's been asking about me. What exactly has she been asking?" Martha hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "She wanted to know if you were eating regular, if you'd been drinking, if you were taking care of yourself. She came in here about 3 weeks ago, bought all those supplies she left at your place. Asked me not to mention it to you if I saw you." Martha's expression softened. "That girl loves you, Bo. Whatever anger she's carrying, it's mixed up with love. Don't forget that." Bo nodded, not trusting his voice. He carried the dog food out to his truck, loaded it in the bed, then stood there in the cold, looking down Main Street toward where Highway 12 split off to the east. The Sunrise Motel was maybe 5 miles from here. Emma was 5 miles from here. He could go right now. Drive out there, knock on room 7, face whatever came next, but his hands were shaking and his heart was hammering, and suddenly 5 miles felt like 500. What would he say? How did you begin to bridge 3 years of silence and hurt? Bo climbed back in his truck but didn't start the engine. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather himself. Through the store window he could see Martha watching him, her expression maternal and concerned. He thought about Emma's letter again, about the care she'd taken to track down the dogs, to make sure they were okay, about her sitting on that ridge watching his cabin in the evenings, about her leaving supplies she knew he needed. She'd been trying to take care of him, even when she couldn't face him. That meant something. That meant the break wasn't as complete as he'd thought. Bo started the truck, but instead of turning toward Highway 12, he turned back toward home, not running away this time, making a choice. He needed to get the cabin in order first, needed to make sure the dogs were settled and fed, needed to figure out what exactly he wanted to say, and there was something else. Something Emma had mentioned in her letter that had been nagging at him. She talked about him not knowing things, about him having his own side of the story, about the funeral and the argument and the grief that had swallowed them both. Back at the cabin, Bo made himself eat something, then started cleaning. Really cleaning, not just the surface tidying he'd been doing for 3 years. He swept floors, washed windows, straightened furniture. The dogs watched him work, occasionally getting in the way, but he didn't mind. Their presence made the work feel purposeful instead of pointless. In the bedroom, working his way through Sarah's things that he'd never quite managed to sort, Bo found a small tin box tucked in the back of her closet. He'd seen it before but never opened it. Some instinct telling him it was private, meant just for Sarah, but Sarah was gone. And inside this box might be something that could help him understand, help him explain to Emma what had really happened. Bo sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, small mementos. He sorted through them carefully, reverently. Sarah's high school graduation announcement, a pressed flower from their wedding, a birthday card Bo had given her 30 years ago, and there near the bottom, a small stack of recipe cards held together with a rubber band. Bo recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately, that careful script she'd always used. But these weren't recipes. They were notes, journal entries maybe, thoughts written down in spare moments. Bo removed the rubber band, hands trembling. The first card was dated 4 months before Sarah died. Tired today. Trying not to worry Bo, He works so hard already. Don't want to add to his burdens. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just getting older. The second card, a month later, pain worse. Bo insists I see Dr. Morrison next week. Don't want to make a fuss, but maybe he's right. Always so stubborn, my Bo. But he sees things I try to hide. Bo's vision blurred. She'd been hiding it, not because he wasn't paying attention, but because she didn't want to worry him. The third card gutted him. Bo took the day off to drive me to Billings. Test results not good. Stage 4, they said, inoperable. Bo went white when they told us. Haven't seen him cry since Emma was born, but he cried in that parking lot. Held me and cried like his heart was breaking. Because it is. Mine too, Bo couldn't breathe. Emma had thought he didn't care, thought he'd delayed out of stubbornness or pride. But Sarah had known. Sarah had seen him fighting for her, breaking for her. The last card was dated a week before she died. Made Bo promise to take care of himself after I'm gone. Made him promise to forgive Emma and forgive himself. He'll try to blame himself, I know he will. He'll think he failed me, but he didn't. He loved me fierce and tender for 38 years. That's not failure, that's everything. Bo sat there holding those cards, Sarah's voice clear as day in the words she'd written. She'd known. She'd understood what her death would do to him, what it would do to Emma. And she'd tried, in her careful way, to leave something behind that might help them find their way back to each other. A scratching at the bedroom door pulled Bo back to the present. He opened it to find all 3 dogs waiting, Duke with that patient expression, Nellie alert and ready, Scout pressing close to his legs. "Come here," Bo said softly, sitting back down on the bed. The dogs arranged themselves around him, familiar and comforting. He held Sarah's recipe cards carefully, these pieces of her thoughts and fears and love. Tomorrow he'd go to the Sunrise Motel. Tomorrow he'd show Emma these cards and explain everything. Tomorrow he'd start trying to rebuild what grief had torn down. But tonight he had dogs to care for and memories to sit with, and the beginning stirrings of something that felt almost like hope. It wasn't much, but maybe it was enough to start. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Bo hadn't known in 3 years. Morning came, with the dogs needing to go out, needing breakfast, needing attention. Simple things, but they gave structure to hours that had been empty for too long. He'd feed them, walk them around the property, then head to Crossfield Ranch for work. The dogs would watch him leave from the porch, patient and trusting in a way that made his chest tight. Frank Crossfield noticed the change immediately. Bo was arriving on time, working with focus he hadn't shown in months. On the 3rd day, Frank rode out to where Bo was stringing wire along the north fence line. "You seem different," Frank said. Sitting easy in his saddle, reins loose in weathered hands. "Got my wife's dogs back," Bo said, not looking up from his work. "Staying home nights now, making me keep better hours." Frank was quiet for a moment, and when Bo finally glanced up, the older man was nodding slowly. "Dogs are good that way. Give you something to care for besides yourself. Better than being alone." "Yes, sir." "You thinking of staying on through spring?" The question surprised Bo. He'd been working month to month, never planning further than the next paycheck. "Haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Well, think about it," Frank said. "Good hands are hard to find. Reliable ones even harder. You've been both lately." He tipped his hat and rode back toward the main ranch, leaving Bo with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, maybe, or purpose. That evening, Bo came home to find Duke lying on the porch, not getting up when he approached. The old retriever's breathing was labored, his eyes glazed with pain. "Easy, boy," Bo murmured, kneeling beside him. He ran his hands over Duke's body, feeling for injury, but found nothing obvious. The dog was just old and worn out from whatever journey had brought him here. Bo loaded Duke into his truck, careful with the weight that felt too light, and drove to town. Dr. Hayes ran the veterinary clinic out of his house, had been tending animals in this county for 40 years. He answered the door in his shirt sleeves, took one look at Duke, and waved Bo inside. "Set him on the table there," Dr. Hayes said, already pulling out his stethoscope. Bo waited while the vet examined Duke, checking heartbeat, respiration, joints. Duke lay still through it all, too tired even to be nervous. When Dr. Hayes finally straightened, his expression was kind but serious. How old is he now? 14, give or take, Bo said. Maybe 15. That's good years for a retriever this size. Dr. Hayes scratched Duke behind the ears. His heart's strong enough, but his joints are bad. Arthritis mostly. Probably some pain from old injuries. I can give you medication that'll help. Anti-inflammatory, some pain relief. But Bo, you need to know he's in his last season. Could be months. Could be less. Bo had known it, but hearing it said out loud made it real. Can he still have some good time? With the meds and good care? Sure. Keep him warm. Don't let him overdo it. He'll tell you when he's had enough. Dr. Hayes prepared a bottle of pills, wrote out instructions. Emma brought him in last fall. Wanted to make sure he was healthy before she brought him back to you. She paid for 6 months of medication in advance. You've got enough here to last through spring. Bo looked up sharply. Emma did that? She did. Came in with all 3 dogs at different times. Made sure they were all checked out, vaccinated, treated for anything that needed treating, spent a good amount of money making sure they'd be healthy for you. Dr. Hayes handed Bo the pills. That girl loves those dogs, and if I'm reading the situation right, she loves you too, just hasn't figured out how to say it. The words sat heavy in Bo's chest as he drove Duke home. Emma had been taking care of these dogs, getting them medical attention, paying for their care, all while watching Bo from a distance, unable or unwilling to bridge the gap between them. Back at the cabin, Bo gave Duke his first pill hidden in a piece of cheese. The dog swallowed it, then settled on his blanket near the stove with a sigh that sounded like relief. Nellie and Scout curled up close to him, like they knew he needed their warmth. Bo sat in his chair, Sarah's recipe cards still on the side table where he'd left them. He picked them up again, reading through them one more time. Her voice came through so clearly in those brief notes. Her worry about being a burden, her understanding of Bo's grief, her hope that he'd find his way through it, made Bo promise to forgive Emma and forgive himself. That line kept circling back. Sarah had known they'd both carry guilt. Both blamed themselves in different ways. She'd tried to give them permission to let it go, to find their way back to each other. Bo found a pen and paper, tried again to write to Emma, but the words still wouldn't come right. How did you compress 3 years of grief and regret into something coherent? How did you explain that you'd tried everything you could think of and it still wasn't enough? A sound at the window made him look up. Snow had started falling, soft and steady, the first real snow of the season. It covered the yard in white, made everything quiet and clean. Sarah had loved the first snow. She'd stand on the porch and just watch it fall, peaceful and content. Bo stood, walked to the window. The dogs joined him, all 3 watching the snow with interest. Duke's tail thumped slowly against the floor. Nellie pressed her nose to the glass. Scout whined softly, excited. Want to go out? Bo asked them. They did. He opened the door, and they ventured onto the porch, tentative at first, then more confident. Even Duke managed to walk down the steps, moving carefully on his bad hips, but moving. The cold seemed to ease his pain somehow, or maybe he just wanted to be part of things, didn't want to miss out. They explored the yard in the falling snow, and Bo watched from the porch, coffee in hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Peace, not happiness yet. Maybe not ever happiness again. Not the way it had been with Sarah. But peace, a moment of quiet in the grief that had been so loud for so long. The dogs came back in, covered in snow, shaking themselves, creating small wet puddles on the floor. Bo dried them off with old towels, taking care with Duke, checking his joints. The old dog tolerated it all with patient dignity, then retreated to his warm spot by the stove. That night, Bo dreamed of Sarah, not the sick Sarah from the end, but Sarah from their early years, young and laughing, standing in the yard of this same cabin, calling to dogs that hadn't been born yet. In the dream, she turned to him and smiled. Go to her, Sarah said, and Bo knew she meant Emma. Don't wait, Bo. Don't let pride or fear keep you apart. Life's too short for that kind of stubbornness. He woke before dawn, the dream still vivid. The dogs were sleeping soundly, Duke's breathing even and peaceful, with the medication helping. Bo lay there in the dark, listening to them, thinking about Emma 5 miles away at the Sunrise Motel. He'd planned to wait, to prepare what he'd say, to make sure everything was right before approaching her. But Sarah's voice from the dream echoed in his mind. Don't wait. Life's too short. Bo got up, made coffee, fed the dogs. When dawn broke pale and cold over the prairie, he put on his good coat, made sure the dogs had water, and headed for his truck. He'd go to the motel. He'd knock on room 7. And whatever happened next, at least he'd have tried. At least he wouldn't be choosing silence and separation anymore. The drive to Highway 12 felt both too long and too short. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to hurt. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept driving, following the road east, watching for the Sunrise Motel sign. It appeared around a bend, a small collection of rooms in need of paint, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. Only 3 cars in the lot. Bo pulled in, parked near room 7 at the end like Martha had said. Emma's car was there, an older sedan, reliable but showing its age. Bo sat in his truck, looking at it, at the closed door of room 7, at the curtain drawn across the window. She was right there, his daughter, 20 feet away, after 3 years of nothing. Bo took a deep breath, opened his truck door, and stepped out into the cold morning. His boots crunched on gravel as he crossed to her door. He raised his hand to knock, held it there for a moment while fear and hope tangled together in his chest. Then he knocked. 3 solid raps that echoed in the quiet morning. For a long moment, nothing. Bo was about to knock again when he heard movement inside. Footsteps. A pause at the door, like someone checking the peephole. Then the door opened, and there was Emma. She looked tired. Older than 29 should look, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, dark circles under eyes that were Sarah's eyes, that particular shade of hazel that changed color depending on the light. She wore scrubs, like she'd just come off a night shift or was about to head to one. She stared at him. He stared back. 3 years of silence stretched between them like a physical thing. "Dad," Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma?" Bo replied, and his voice broke on her name. "Can we talk?" Emma stepped back from the door, a wordless invitation. Bo entered the small motel room, taking in details automatically. Unmade bed, laptop open on the desk, medical textbooks stacked beside it, coffee maker with a half-full pot. The room of someone living temporarily, not settling, just existing between one place and another. "I was about to drive out to the cabin," Emma said, closing the door, "to check on the dogs, see if they were still there." "They're there," Bo said, settled in like they never left. Emma nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked fragile in a way that scared him. Sarah had looked like that near the end, like she was holding herself together through pure will. "Are you okay?" Bo asked. "I'm fine," the automatic response. Bo had used the same words 1,000 times when he wasn't fine at all. "Emma," he said, her name gently, the way he used to when she was small and had scraped her knee or had a bad dream. "I read your letter. Martha told me you've been here, that you've been watching the cabin." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back hard. "I didn't know if you'd even care, if you'd want them back, want any reminder of—" She couldn't finish. "Of your mother," Bo finished for her. "Emma, I gave those dogs away because I couldn't take care of them, not because I didn't want reminders of her. Everything in my life reminds me of her. The cabin, the land, this whole damn town. Getting rid of 3 dogs didn't change that." "Then why?" Emma's voice rose. "Why did you shut down so completely? Why couldn't you let me help you?" "Because I was drowning," Bo said simply. "And when you're drowning, you can't help anyone else. You just try to keep your head above water long enough to take the next breath." Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, looking suddenly exhausted. "I was drowning too, Dad. But instead of drowning together, we just drifted apart." Bo pulled the desk chair around, sat down facing her. Close, but not crowding. "At the funeral," he started, then had to stop, gather himself. You said I killed her, that I waited too long to take her seriously. Emma flinched. I shouldn't have said that. No, let me finish. Bo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You said it because that's what you believed. And I understand why. From where you were standing, it looked like I'd ignored her symptoms, like I'd been stubborn and proud and let her get sicker because I didn't want to admit something was wrong. Emma was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. I was so angry. At you, at the doctors, at God, at everything. She was my mom and she was dying, and nothing made sense anymore. I found something, Bo said. He pulled Sarah's recipe cards from his coat pocket, the ones with her handwritten notes. These were in a box in her closet. I never looked before, but I found them yesterday. He handed them to Emma. She took them with trembling hands, reading through them one by one. Bo watched her face as she absorbed her mother's words, saw the moment when understanding dawned. She was hiding it from you, Emma whispered. She didn't tell you how bad it was, not at first. By the time I noticed how sick she looked, by the time I insisted on the doctor, she'd been suffering for months. She didn't want to worry me, didn't want to be a burden. Bo's voice roughened. But Emma, when we found out how serious it was, I didn't give up. I never gave up. He pulled more papers from his pocket. Medical bills, letters from hospitals, rejection notices from insurance companies, bank statements showing loans taken against the cabin. He'd organized them all last night, putting together the proof of everything he'd tried. What is this? Emma asked, taking the papers. That's me trying to save your mother. Bo's hand shook. That's me applying for experimental treatments in Seattle and Denver and Houston. That's me taking out a second mortgage on the cabin to pay for them. That's me begging insurance companies to cover procedures they called investigational. That's me selling everything I could sell, borrowing everything I could borrow, trying everything I could think of. Emma read through the papers, her tears falling faster now. I didn't know. Dad, I didn't know any of this. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you carrying that weight. You were trying to finish your nursing degree, had your own life starting. I'd thought if I could just get her into one of these trials, just get her one more chance. His voice broke completely. But they all said no. Stage 4 was too advanced. She didn't qualify. We didn't have enough money. It was too late. Oh, Dad. Emma moved from the bed to kneel in front of him, taking his hands. I'm so sorry. I thought you'd just accepted it. Just let her go without fighting. I fought like hell, Bo said. But sometimes fighting isn't enough. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. They sat there together, the silence different now. Not the silence of anger and distance, but the silence of shared grief, finally acknowledged. Why didn't you tell me? Emma asked eventually. Why didn't you show me these papers at the funeral when I was blaming you? Because you were hurting, Bo said, and you needed somewhere to put that hurt. If blaming me helped you process it, I could take that. I'd failed her anyway, not by not trying, but by not succeeding. The outcome was the same. That's not how it works, Emma said firmly, sounding like Sarah for a moment. Trying matters. Intent matters. You loved her and you fought for her and you lost her anyway, but that doesn't make it your fault. Bo nodded, unable to speak. They stayed like that for a long moment, Emma holding his hands, both of them crying quietly. I'm sick, Emma said finally. That's why I came back. That's why I've been staying here instead of Billings. Fear shot through Bo's chest. How sick? Not like Mom, Emma said quickly. Nothing like that. I have an autoimmune condition. They caught it early. I'm on medication, managing it, but it's been affecting my work. The stress of 12-hour shifts, the irregular hours, it's too much. I've been trying to figure out what to do next. Come home, Bo said immediately. Come back to the cabin. Let me take care of you for a change. I don't need taking care of, Emma said, but her voice was uncertain. Neither did I, apparently, Bo said. But you did it anyway? Tracking down the dogs, leaving supplies, watching to make sure I was okay, paying for Duke's medications. He squeezed her hands. Let me do the same. Let me be your father again. Emma broke down completely then, sobbing against his shoulder. Bo held her, this daughter who was so much like Sarah, it hurt to look at sometimes. and let her cry out 3 years of grief and anger and fear. When she could finally speak again, she said, "I've been so alone, Dad. Even when I had the dogs. Even when I was working with people all day, I was so alone." "Me too," Bo said. "But maybe we don't have to be anymore." They talked until the sun was high, until Emma's shift time had come and gone, and she called in to say she wouldn't make it. They talked about Sarah, sharing memories that had been too painful to speak aloud before. They talked about the funeral and the things they'd both said in grief and rage. They talked about the dogs and how they'd found their way home, despite everything. "Duke's not doing great," Bo admitted. "Dr. Hayes says he's in his last season, but he's comfortable. Happy, I think. He's home. We're all home," Emma said. "Or we could be, if you meant what you said about me coming back to the cabin." "I meant it," Bo assured her. "Place has been too empty for too long. Could use some life in it again." Emma looked around the motel room at the temporary life she'd built here. "I'd need to give notice at the hospital. Figure out what I'm doing for work down here. Martha's been talking about retiring," Bo said. "Store needs someone young to run it, someone who knows the community. Might not be nursing, but it's taking care of people," Emma finished. "Just in a different way." "I could do that." She smiled, the first real smile Bo had seen from her in 3 years. "Mom would have liked that, me running Martha's store." "She would have," Bo agreed. They made plans then. Practical plans about moving Emma's things, about setting up her room in the cabin, about how they'd figure things out day by day. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. When Bo finally stood to leave, Emma hugged him tight. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "You never gave up on me," Bo said. "Just took me a while to see it." He drove back to the cabin with hope in his chest, where only emptiness had been. The dogs greeted him like he'd been gone for days instead of hours. He fed them, walked them, sat with them on the porch watching the sun set over land that suddenly felt less like a burden and more like possibility. Tomorrow, Emma would start packing. Next week she'd move home. They'd rebuild what grief had broken, one day at a time, with 3 loyal dogs and Sarah's memory guiding them forward. Bo pulled out the old harmonica Emma had restored and left in the supply box. His fingers found the holes awkwardly at first, but muscle memory came back. He played a simple tune, one Sarah had loved, and the dogs settled around him to listen. The music carried across the empty prairie, a small sound against all that space. But it was there. It was real. And for the first time in 3 years, Bo McCrae was playing again. Emma moved home on a Tuesday, her belongings fitting into Bo's truck bed with room to spare. Not much accumulated in 3 years of living temporary, she'd said. Just clothes and books and the essentials. The dogs rode in the cab with them, pressed close together, seeming to understand something good was happening. The cabin felt different with Emma in it. She'd taken over her old room, small but comfortable, with a window facing east toward the sunrise. She'd brought her medical textbooks, even though she wasn't sure she'd need them anymore. Some habits die hard, Bo supposed. The need to hold on to what you've worked for, even when the path forward looks different than you'd planned. They fell into a routine quickly, surprisingly quickly. Emma would wake early, make coffee, feed the dogs, while Bo got ready for work at Crossfields. They'd have breakfast together, mostly quiet, still learning how to be around each other again. Then Bo would head out for the day, while Emma tackled projects around the cabin, organizing, cleaning, making the place feel lived in again. She'd talked to Martha about the store job, she'd said. Give notice at the hospital, make the transition official. But there was no rush. For now, it was enough to be home, to be together, to be healing. 2 weeks in, Tom Willis stopped by. Bo was mending fence in the near pasture when Tom's truck rattled up the drive. The neighbor climbed out slow, the way men their age did, favoring his bad knee. "Bo," Tom greeted. "Tom, something wrong?" Maybe not. Wanted to talk to you about something." Tom glanced toward the cabin. "That your Emma's car I saw?" "She's moved back." "Helping me out here. Good. That's good." Tom seemed to be working up to something. "You heard about the developer that's been nosing around?" Bo straightened, tossing the wire cutters in his tool belt. "Heard some talk at Paulson's. Nothing specific. They're looking to buy up land along this stretch. Want to put in some kind of resort community. Dude ranches, they're calling them. Places where city folks can come play cowboy for a week. Tom spat in the dirt. They've made offers to most of us older timers. Good offers, truth be told. More than the land's worth as working ranch property. Bo felt something cold settle in his gut. You selling? Thinking about it. Ranch is bleeding money. My kids don't want it. Wife's been after me for years to move closer to her sister in Bozeman. Tom looked across the prairie, at land his family had worked for 3 generations. Hard to let go. But harder to keep holding on when there's nothing left to hold on to. What about the others? Morrison Place? Chen family? Both sold already. Developers own everything from here to the highway now, except for my spread and yours. Tom turned to face Bo directly. They came to see me last week. Asked about your place specifically. Wanted to know if you might be interested in selling. The cold in Bo's gut spread to his chest. What did you tell them? Told them to ask you themselves. But Bo, they know your situation. Know your working wages at Crossfields. Know you took out loans against this place a few years back. Tom's expression was sympathetic. They're going to make you an offer you'll have trouble refusing. Bo looked at the cabin, at the land Sarah's family had homesteaded over a century ago, at the fence line he'd just mended, the pasture where Sarah used to watch sunsets, the porch where Emma and the dogs waited every evening for him to come home. This place isn't for sale, Bo said. You might want to hear the offer first. They're talking real money, Bo. Enough to pay off whatever you owe and then some. Enough to set you and Emma up comfortable somewhere else. I don't want somewhere else. I want here, Tom nodded slowly. Figured you'd say that. Just wanted to give you warning. They're not the type to take no easy. They'll come at you different angles. Try to pressure you. Might make things difficult. After Tom left, Bo stood in the pasture for a long time, looking at his land with new eyes. He'd been so focused on grief and loss, on just getting through each day, that he hadn't noticed the bigger picture changing around him. The town dying, ranches failing, developers circling like vultures. That evening he told Emma about the conversation. They sat on the porch, dogs at their feet, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. We should hear them out, Emma said carefully. At least know what we're dealing with. Nothing to deal with. Place isn't for sale. Dad, be reasonable. If the land around us is already sold, if they're planning a resort, then they'll plan it around us. Bo's voice was harder than he'd intended. I'm not leaving. This is our home. Emma was quiet for a moment. Is it about Mom? About not wanting to let go of the place she loved. It's about family, Bo said. About not giving up the one piece of solid ground we've got left. Your mother's family built this cabin. We raised you here. The dogs came home here. This place matters. I know it matters, Emma said softly. But if we can't afford to keep it, we'll find a way. But even as he said it, Bo knew the math didn't add up. His wages from Crossfields barely covered basic expenses. The mortgage payments he'd taken to pay for Sarah's treatments were due monthly. There was no cushion, no savings, no room for error. That night, Bo couldn't sleep. He got up around midnight, careful not to wake the dogs, and went to his desk. He pulled out the old ledger where he tracked his finances, spreading papers across the surface. Bills, loan documents, payment schedules, the numbers didn't lie. He was 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank had sent notices he'd been ignoring. If he missed 2 more payments, they could foreclose. He could lose this place, whether he wanted to sell or not. And there was something else. Something he'd been trying not to think about. The medical bills from Sarah's treatment, the ones that had gone to collections. He'd thought he was making payment arrangements, thought he was keeping on top of them. But looking at the documents now, with clear eyes instead of grief-clouded ones, he saw how bad it really was. He owed more than the land was worth. Even if he wanted to sell, wanted to take whatever offer the developers made, it might not be enough to cover his debts. He could lose everything and still owe money, the weight of it pressed down on Bo's chest, making it hard to breathe. He'd spent 3 years just surviving, not paying attention to the practical realities closing in around him. And now Emma was home, depending on him, planning a future here, and he'd let things get so bad that he might not be able to give her the stability she needed. A sound made him turn. Emma stood in the doorway, wearing one of Sarah's old robes she'd found in the closet. She looked at the papers spread across the desk, at Beau's face, and her expression shifted from sleepy to alert. "How bad is it?" she asked. Beau wanted to lie, wanted to say it was fine, under control. But he was done lying to his daughter, even lies meant to protect her. "Bad," he admitted. "Worse than I thought." Emma came to the desk, picked up papers, read through them. Her nursing degree had taught her to assess situations quickly, process information, make decisions. Beau watched her sort through his financial disaster with methodical efficiency. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, we can work with this." "Emma, no, listen. I have savings. Not a lot, but some. We can use that to catch up the mortgage payments. Buy us time. I'm not taking your money. It's not about taking. It's about family helping family." She set the papers down, faced him squarely. "You tried to save Mom with everything you had. You bankrupted yourself trying. I know that now. And I'm not going to watch you lose this place because of it. Not when I can help." "It's more than just catching up a few payments," Beau said. "The medical bills, we'll deal with those too. One thing at a time." "But Dad, you need to know something." Emma took a breath. "When I said I was sick, that I had an autoimmune condition, that was true. But it's not the whole truth." Beau's fears spiked. "What do you mean?" "The condition, it's manageable. With medication and less stress, I'm fine. But the reason I left Billings, the real reason, is that I'd been working myself sick trying to pay down Mom's medical bills." Emma's eyes filled. "The collection agencies, they went after me too, as next of kin. I've been making payments for 3 years, trying to protect you from them, trying to cover what you couldn't." The world tilted. Beau gripped the edge of the desk. "You've been paying for your mother's treatment?" "All this time. Someone had to, and you were barely functioning. I couldn't let you deal with that on top of everything else." Emma's voice shook. "But it broke me, Dad. Working 70-hour weeks, never sleeping, never having anything left over. The stress made me sick. The doctors said I had to change my life, or I was headed for serious trouble." Beau pulled her into his arms. This daughter who'd been carrying such a heavy burden alone. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Same reason you didn't tell me about trying all those experimental treatments," Emma said into his shoulder. "I was trying to protect you." They stood like that for a long moment, both of them exhausted by secrets, by grief, by the weight of trying to carry too much alone. When they finally pulled apart, Emma wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. "So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sit down with all of this tomorrow, figure out exactly what we owe and to who. Then we're going to make a plan. Maybe we do need to hear what the developers are offering. Maybe there's a way to negotiate something that gives us options." "I don't want to sell," Beau said. "I know. But wanting something and being able to keep it aren't always the same thing. We need to at least know what we're up against." Emma gathered the papers into a neat stack. "And Dad, we're doing this together. No more secrets. No more trying to protect each other by hiding the truth." "Deal," Beau nodded. "Deal." But as he lay in bed later, listening to the dogs breathe and the old cabin settle around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that knowing the truth wasn't going to be enough. The numbers were what they were. The debts were real. And losing this place, this home that Sarah had loved and Emma had come back to, might not be something they could prevent, no matter how hard they tried. The developers arrived on Thursday. 2 men in expensive trucks that looked like they'd never seen a day of actual ranch work. They wore pressed jeans and boots too clean to be trusted. The older one introduced himself as Richard Hartley, Senior Land Acquisition Specialist. The younger was James Something, his assistant. Beau met them on the porch, dogs at his side. Emma stayed inside, but watched through the window. They'd spent the past 2 days going through every bill, every debt, every option. The truth was harsh. They owed more than the land was worth on the open market. But resort developers weren't open market. They could pay premium prices for strategic parcels. "Mr. McCrae," Hartley said with a practiced smile, "thank you for seeing us. Haven't decided if I'm seeing you yet. Bo said. Depends on what you want. Direct. I like that. Hartley gestured to the land around them. Beautiful property. How long has it been in your family? Long enough. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. Cash sale, quick closing, no contingencies. Hartley pulled papers from his briefcase. $200,000. Bo felt his heart kick. That was more than twice what he'd expected. More than enough to pay off every debt and have money left over. Enough to start fresh somewhere else. No, he said. Hartley's smile didn't waver. I understand this is emotional. Family land always is. But Mr. McCrae, we know your financial situation. We know you're behind on your mortgage. We know about the medical debts. This offer solves all of that and gives you capital to begin again. How do you know about my situation? Bo asked quietly. It's public record. Mortgages, liens, court filings. We do our research. Hartley set the papers on the porch rail. 200,000. That's well above fair market value. It's more than fair. I said no. The younger man, James, spoke up. Sir, you need to understand. We're planning a comprehensive development of this entire area. Your property sits right in the middle of our planned resort. If you don't sell voluntarily, there are other options. Eminent domain, for instance. The county would love to see economic development here. They might be willing to help us acquire the property. That's a threat, Bo said. That's reality, James said. This area is dying. The development we're proposing will bring jobs, tax revenue, tourism dollars. The county commissioners understand that. They understand the greater good sometimes requires difficult decisions. Bo felt his anger rising, but kept his voice level. Get off my land! Hartley held up a hand to quiet James. Mr. McCrae, sleep on it. Talk it over with your daughter. We'll leave our offer on the table for 1 week. After that, the price drops. Market forces, you understand. Time is money. They left, their trucks churning up dust as they headed back toward town. Bo stood on the porch long after they'd gone. The papers they'd left feeling like a weight. Emma came out, touched his shoulder. 200,000. I know. That's enough to... I know, Bo said again. He turned to face her. But it's not about the money. It's about them thinking they can come here and threaten us. Eminent domain. The county commissioners. They're going to try to force us out. Then we fight them, Emma said, with Sarah's stubborn determination in her eyes. But we fight smart. Let me go to town, talk to people, see what's really happening with this development. While Emma went to gather information, Bo went to work at Crossfield Ranch. Frank noticed his distraction immediately, heard the developers came to see you. Frank said during their lunch break, news travels fast, always does in small places. Frank bit into his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. They came to me too. Last month, offered me 300,000 for my spread. Bo looked up sharply. You selling? No. Told them the same thing I'll tell you. This land isn't just an asset on a balance sheet. It's legacy. It's work and sweat and blood over generations. Frank stared out at his cattle. But they're not giving up. They're talking to the county about tax incentives, about how the resort will save the local economy. They've got politicians and bankers on their side. What can we do? We? You thinking there's a we in this? Frank smiled slightly. Good, because you're right. If they push through this development using government force, it sets a precedent. Today it's your 40 acres and my 3,000. Tomorrow it's anyone who doesn't want to sell. We need to stand together. Emma returned that afternoon with information that made the picture clearer and more troubling. The developers had already acquired most of the land in the area. They'd applied for zoning changes with the county. They'd lined up financing from a major investment firm. This wasn't a speculative venture. It was a done deal in their minds, with Bo's property the last piece of the puzzle. Martha says there's a county meeting next Tuesday, Emma reported. They're voting on the zoning changes. If those pass, the developers can move forward with or without our cooperation. They'll start building around us, and the county could declare our property a blighted obstruction to economic development. That's legal? Bo asked. Martha's not sure. But she says we need a lawyer. A good one. Emma pulled out her phone. I've been making calls. There's a law firm in Billings that handles property rights cases. They've worked on eminent domain issues before. I've a consultation scheduled for tomorrow if you want to go. Bo looked at his daughter, at this woman who'd come home to heal and found herself fighting to save their home instead. When did you get so capable? I've always been capable, Emma said with a hint of her old spark. You just forgot for a while. The next day, they drove to Billings together, leaving the dogs in Duke's care. The old retriever had appointed himself guardian of the cabin. The law office was professional, efficient, expensive-looking. The attorney, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez, listened to their situation with careful attention. I won't lie to you, she said after they'd explained everything. This is difficult. The developers have done their homework. They've structured this in a way that makes legal challenges hard. But there are arguments we can make. Property rights, family heritage, the questionable use of eminent domain for private development. Can you stop them? Bo asked. I can make it expensive and time-consuming for them to proceed. I can argue your case at the county meeting. I can file injunctions if they try to force the issue. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. But Mr. McCrae, Miss McCrae, you need to understand something. Even if we win every legal battle, even if we stop the eminent domain angle, they can still make your lives very difficult. Construction around you, access issues, constant pressure to sell. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Emma said at the same time. Bo said, I don't know. They looked at each other. Rodriguez gave them a moment. The retainer for this kind of case is $10,000, she said. That covers initial filings and representation at the county meeting. If this goes to litigation, costs go up significantly from there. Bo's stomach sank. $10,000. Money they didn't have, even with Emma's savings. Money that would put them deeper in the hole, farther from stability. Can we think about it? Emma asked. Of course, but the county meeting is Tuesday. If you want me there arguing against the zoning changes, I need the retainer by Monday morning. Rodriguez handed them her card. I believe in property rights. I believe in fighting for the little guy. But I also have to run a business. I'm sorry I can't offer you more than that. The drive back to Mercer's Bend was quiet. Bo felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Fight and risk losing everything, including their financial future. Sell and lose the home but gain stability. There were no good options, just degrees of loss. We could ask Frank for help, Emma said as they passed the Morrison place, already torn down to make way for new construction. Or Martha. Or take out a loan. I'm not borrowing more money, Bo said. And I'm not asking friends to risk their savings on a fight we might not win. Then what? We just give up? I didn't say that. But Bo didn't know what else to say either. He was a ranch hand who'd spent his life working with his hands, not navigating legal battles and political machinations. He was out of his depth and sinking fast. That evening, Bo sat on the porch with Duke. The old dog's condition had worsened over the past week. He slept more, ate less, moved with obvious pain despite the medication. Dr. Hayes had been clear. Duke was failing. His time was measured in weeks now, maybe days. You made it home, Bo said to the dog, scratching behind his ears the way Duke liked. Traveled all that way, found your way back. Was it worth it? Getting home just to... He couldn't finish. Duke looked at him with those patient brown eyes, and Bo would swear the dog understood. Home wasn't about how long you got to stay. It was about being where you belonged, with who you belonged to, for whatever time remained. Emma found them there as the sun set. She sat beside Bo, close enough that their shoulders touched. Nellie and Scout joined them, the whole pack together. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and empty and beautiful in the fading light. I've been thinking, Emma said, about what Mom would do. What she would want us to do. What's that? She'd want us to fight. Not because we'd necessarily win, but because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad. Emma took Bo's hand. This land, this home, what it represents. Family, legacy, standing your ground. She'd say that's worth $10,000 and whatever comes after. We don't have $10,000. We will. Emma's voice was determined. I'll take an extra shift at the hospital before I give notice. We'll sell anything we don't absolutely need. We'll figure it out. But, Dad, I'm not letting them take our home without a fight. Are you? Both thought about Sarah, about all she'd fought for and fought through. He thought about these dogs who'd crossed the state to get back here. He thought about Emma, who'd come home despite their broken relationship, despite everything. "No," he said finally. "I'm not letting them take it without a fight." Emma squeezed his hand. "Then Monday morning we give Sarah Rodriguez her retainer. And Tuesday night we go to that county meeting and we make our case. Together." The dogs settled around them as darkness fell. Inside the cabin, Sarah's quilt lay folded on the chair. Her recipe card sat on the desk. Her memory filled every corner of this place. And for that memory, for Emma, for the future they were trying to build from broken pieces, Bo would fight. He just hoped it would be enough. Monday morning arrived with bitter cold and clear skies. Bo and Emma drove to the bank in town first, withdrawing what little savings remained. Then they stopped at Martha's store, where Martha handed Emma an envelope without a word. Inside was $3,000 in cash. "Martha, we can't," Emma started. "You can and you will," Martha said firmly. "Sarah was my friend. I'm not letting her family lose their home if I can help it. Pay me back when you're able. Or don't. Either way, that money's yours." They collected smaller amounts from other townspeople throughout the morning. Frank Crossfield contributed $2,000. Dr. Hayes sent $500. Tom Willis, despite his own financial struggles, offered $1,000. By noon, they had the $10,000 they needed. "This town," Emma said as they drove toward Billings, the envelope of cash heavy in her lap. "I forgot how people take care of each other here. They're investing in more than just our fight," Bo said. "If we lose, if the developers can force us out, nobody's safe. This is about all of them, too." They delivered the retainer to Sarah Rodriguez's office. She counted the cash, mostly small bills from working people, and her expression softened. "I'll earn this," she promised. "I'll give you everything I've got." Tuesday evening, the county meeting hall filled beyond capacity. Bo hadn't seen this many people in one place since Sarah's funeral. Ranchers and store owners, teachers and mechanics, folks who'd lived in this county their whole lives. They'd come to see what would happen to their world, to their way of life. The developers were there too, Hartley and James, with a whole team of lawyers and consultants. They had presentations prepared, economic projections, glossy brochures showing what the resort would look like. They spoke of jobs and growth and prosperity. When it was Bo's turn to speak, he stood at the microphone feeling every one of his 62 years. He'd never been good with words, had always let Sarah do the talking when talking was needed. But Sarah wasn't here. Only him and Emma and the memory of everything they stood to lose. "My name is Bo McCrae," he said, his voice rough but steady. "My wife's family homesteaded the land you're talking about taking over 100 years ago. We've worked that land, raised our family there, buried our dead in the cemetery just past the property line. It's not just real estate to us. It's our lives." He looked around the room, at faces he'd known for decades. "I know times are hard. I know jobs are scarce and money's tight. I know a resort sounds like it might save this place. But what are we saving if we give up everything that makes it worth saving? What's left of a community when we sell it piece by piece to the highest bidder?" Hartley stood, interrupting. "Mr. McCrae's sentiment is touching, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. The reality is that this area is economically depressed. Our development represents $40 million in investment, 200 permanent jobs, tax revenue that could fund schools and infrastructure. The commissioners have to consider the greater good." Sarah Rodriguez stepped forward. "The greater good doesn't include seizing private property for private profit. The use of eminent domain in this case is questionable at best, illegal at worst. My client has a constitutional right to his property. That right doesn't disappear because a developer wants to build a resort." The debate went on for 2 hours. Arguments about economic development versus property rights, about the future of rural communities, about what progress really meant. The commissioners listened, asked questions, took notes. Finally, the chairman called for a vote on the zoning changes. Bo held his breath, Emma's hand tight in his. The room went silent. "Motion to approve the zoning changes," the chairman said. "All in favor?" 2 hands went up. 2 out of 5 commissioners. Opposed? 3 hands. The zoning changes failed. The room erupted. cheering from the townspeople, angry protests from the developers. Bo felt Emma's arms around him, felt the weight that had been crushing his chest lift slightly. They'd won. For now, they'd won. Outside in the parking lot, Rodriguez found them. "This isn't over," she said. "They'll regroup, try another angle. But you bought yourselves time. Use it wisely." Bo and Emma drove home in the dark, exhausted but cautiously hopeful. The dogs greeted them at the door, and Bo noticed immediately that something was wrong. Duke wasn't with them. He found the old retriever on his blanket by the stove, breathing shallow and labored. Duke's eyes opened when Bo knelt beside him, and the dog's tail moved once, weakly in recognition. Emma appeared with the emergency vet number, but Bo shook his head. "It's time," he said softly. "He made it home. He saw us come back together. That's what he needed." They sat with Duke through the night, all of them, Bo, Emma, Nellie, and Scout. They stroked his graying fur, told him he was a good dog, the best dog. And somewhere near dawn, with his family around him, Duke took his last breath and went to find Sarah in the morning light. Bo and Emma buried him on the hill behind the cabin, next to where Sarah's ashes were scattered. They marked the spot with a smooth river stone. And though the grief was heavy, there was peace in it too. Duke had made it home. He'd fulfilled whatever purpose had driven him back across the state. He'd helped bring Bo and Emma together again. Some journeys, Bo thought, are about the destination more than the time you get to spend there. The week after Duke's death passed in a blur of quiet grief. Nellie and Scout seemed to understand their pack had diminished. They stayed close to Bo and Emma, rarely straying far from the cabin. The empty spot by the stove remained empty. Neither Bo nor Emma could bring themselves to move Duke's blanket, not yet. On Friday, Martha called. "You need to come to the store, now." Bo and Emma arrived to find Martha behind the counter, her expression grim. She handed them a newspaper from Billings. The headline made Bo's stomach drop. "County Commissioners under investigation for developer ties." The article detailed financial connections between two of the commissioners who'd voted against the zoning changes and local opposition groups. Anonymous sources suggested the commissioners had received pressure from constituents, but also that their negative votes might have been influenced by competing development interests. "What does this mean?" Emma asked. "It means the developers are playing dirty," Martha said. "They're trying to discredit the vote, claim it was corrupt. They're pushing for a revote with replacement commissioners. Sarah Rodriguez confirmed it when they called her. They're arguing the vote was tainted by improper influence. The state attorney general is looking into it. If they can get the vote overturned, they'll bring the zoning changes back with a new commission that might be more sympathetic to development." "How long do we have?" Bo asked. "Could be weeks, could be months. But Mr. McCrae, you need to prepare for the possibility that you might lose the next round. The political pressure is intense. Jobs and tax revenue are powerful arguments, especially in economically depressed areas." After she hung up, Bo and Emma sat in silence. Nellie pressed against Emma's legs. Scout jumped into Bo's lap despite being too big for it. "Maybe we should take their money," Emma said finally. "While the offer's still good, we could pay everyone back who helped us, still have enough to start over somewhere else. Is that what you want?" Bo asked. Emma looked around the cabin, at Sarah's quilt, at the kitchen where her mother had cooked thousands of meals, at the windows overlooking land that held generations of family history. "No," she said, "but I don't want to drag this out until we lose everything either. I don't want the people who helped us to lose their money because we were too stubborn to see reality." Bo understood her fear because he felt it too, but he also felt something else. Something that had been building since Duke died, since they'd buried him on the hill next to Sarah. A certainty that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. "I need to show you something," he said. He led Emma to the desk, pulled out a folder he'd been working on privately. Inside were documents he'd been gathering, plans he'd been making, applications to the National Historic Registry, research on conservation easements, documentation of the cabin's history and the land's ecological significance. "What is this?" Emma asked, reading through the papers. "It's another way to fight," Bo said. If we can get this place designated as historically significant, if we can establish conservation protections, it becomes much harder for developers to build here. Maybe impossible. Why didn't you tell me you were doing this? Because I wasn't sure it would work. Still not sure. But I've been talking to people at the State Historical Society, at environmental organizations. There's interest. This land has native prairie grasses that are rare now. The cabin is one of the oldest original homesteads still standing in the county. There's precedent for this kind of protection. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You're not giving up. I'm not giving up, Bo confirmed. But Emma, if we do this, if we try to get these protections in place, it's going to make the developers more aggressive. They'll see it as a threat to their plans. Things could get worse before they get better. Let them get worse, Emma said with sudden fierceness. I'm done running scared. I'm done letting other people decide what happens to our family. Mom fought cancer with everything she had. You fought to save her. I can fight for this home. Over the weekend, they worked together on the historic designation application. They photographed every detail of the cabin's construction, documented the prairie grasses with help from a botanist Frank Crossfield recommended, compiled family records going back to the original homestead claim. Martha provided historical context about the town's development. Tom Willis shared stories about the land from his own family's oral history. Dr. Hayes contributed documentation about the prairie dog colony on the property's edge, a species of concern for conservationists. What emerged was a picture not just of a single 40-acre parcel, but of a piece of living history, a place where the past and present connected, where family and land and memory intertwined in ways that couldn't be reduced to dollar values on a developer's spreadsheet. On Monday, they submitted the application. Sarah Rodriguez filed it with the county as well, creating a legal complication for any development plans. If the historical designation was granted, if the conservation easements were approved, the developer's resort would have a protected property in the middle of it. Their plans would have to change dramatically or be abandoned entirely. Tuesday morning, Hartley appeared at the cabin, alone this time without lawyers or assistants. He looked tired, frustrated. You're making this very difficult, Mr. McCrae. Good, Bo said from the porch. Nellie and Scout flanked him, not aggressive but present. The historic designation, the conservation easements, the media attention your lawyer is generating. You understand you're not just fighting me. You're fighting economic progress. You're fighting what's best for this whole region. I'm fighting to keep my home, Bo said simply. That's all. You want to build your resort? Build it somewhere else. There's plenty of empty land in Montana, not with the access and location your property provides. Hartley climbed the porch steps, pulled out a new document. Final offer. $300,000, cash, 30-day close. And we'll make a donation to the Historical Society in your wife's name. $50,000. That's walking away money, Mr. McCrae. That's set-for-life money. Bo looked at the number. $300,000. Enough to pay back everyone who'd helped them and have plenty left over. Enough to buy a nice place somewhere else, somewhere without all this fight and struggle. Enough to give Emma security and peace. No, he said and handed the document back. Hartley's professional demeanor cracked. You're a fool. You know that. A stubborn old fool who's going to lose everything because you can't accept that your way of life is dead. This whole area is dying. We're offering to bring it back to life, and you're standing in the way because of sentiment and nostalgia. Maybe, Bo said. Or maybe I'm standing in the way because someone needs to remember that not everything worth having can be bought and sold. Now get off my property. After Hartley left, Bo's hands shook with anger and fear and determination. Emma appeared with coffee, pressed a warm mug into his hands. $300,000, she said softly. I know, that's a lot of money. It is. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, and it was Sarah's smile, full of stubborn pride and fierce love. Good thing money isn't everything, then. Together they watched the sun climb higher, warming the cold morning, bringing light to the land they were fighting to keep. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That was worth more than any amount of money the developers could offer. Spring came slowly to the Montana prairie, the way it always did. Snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would green up when the warmth truly settled in. The days grew longer. The wind shifted from bitter to merely cold. And on the hill behind the cabin, wildflowers began to emerge around the stones, marking Duke's resting place and where Sarah's ashes were. Scattered, the historic designation came through in late March. The Montana Historical Society deemed the McCrae cabin and surrounding land significant for both architectural and ecological reasons. Conservation easements followed, protecting the native prairie grasses and restricting future development. The legal protections weren't absolute, but they were strong enough. Strong enough that the developer's plans became impractical. Strong enough that Hartley and his team eventually moved on to easier targets. The county recovered slowly from the turmoil. 2 commissioners resigned under pressure. New elections brought in people who cared more about preserving what remained of the old ranching communities than chasing development dollars that might never materialize. The investigated corruption claims went nowhere, but the taint of impropriety hung over the development company. Their investors got nervous and pulled funding. By April, the Sunrise Resort project was dead. Emma officially took over Martha's store in May. Martha stayed on part-time, training Emma in the peculiar art of running a rural general store, knowing everyone's business, keeping the right stock, extending credit when necessary, collecting debts with firmness but grace. Emma was good at it, better than she'd expected. The medical training helped. Running a store was about diagnosing needs and providing care. Just different kinds. Bo continued at Crossfield Ranch, but Frank promoted him to foreman, managing the other hands, making decisions about livestock and land management. The pay increase wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Enough to start paying back the people who'd helped them. Enough to feel like they were moving forward instead of just treading water. Nellie and Scout adjusted to life without Duke. Nellie seemed to age into the role of elder dog, more patient with Scout's occasional bursts of puppyish energy, more protective of the property. Scout stayed close to Emma, following her to the store most days, greeting customers with enthusiastic tail wags. The townspeople loved him, brought him treats, spoiled him thoroughly. On a Sunday in June, Bo and Emma drove to Billings for a special purchase. They returned with a young golden retriever pup, 8 weeks old, clumsy and curious and full of life. They named him Hope. Mom would have liked that name, Emma said, holding the puppy, while Nellie sniffed him cautiously and Scout tried to play. She would have, Bo agreed. He thought about Sarah constantly now, but the grief had changed. Less raw, more bittersweet. Less about what he'd lost, and more about gratitude for what he'd had. 38 years of marriage. A daughter who'd come home. Dogs who'd traveled the distance to remind him that family was worth fighting for. They established new traditions. Sunday dinners became a fixture, with Emma cooking from Sarah's recipe cards, Bo playing harmonica on the porch afterward. They invited friends, Martha, Frank, Tom Willis, Dr. Hayes. The cabin filled with talk and laughter, with the warmth of community and connection. Emma's health improved steadily. Less stress, regular hours, good food, and the support of family made all the difference. The autoimmune condition was managed, controlled, no longer the threat it had been when she'd been working herself to exhaustion in Billings. In July, they held a memorial service for Duke on the hill. Just family and close friends, speaking words over the stone marker, remembering a dog who'd somehow known that coming home was more important than anything else. Sarah Rodriguez came, surprising them. She'd become a friend through the legal battle, invested in their story beyond just professional obligation. You know, she said afterward, standing on the porch with coffee, I've handled a lot of property cases. Usually they're about money or principle in the abstract. But this one was different. This one was about what home really means. Thank you for reminding me why I went into law in the first place. August brought Tom Willis selling his ranch, after all, but not to developers. He sold to a young family from Bozeman, folks who wanted to get back to ranching, who had enough money saved to give it a real shot. They moved into Tom's old house with their 3 kids and started learning the work. The community rallied around them the way they'd rallied around Bo and Emma. That was what small towns did when they remembered who they were. On an evening in September, almost a year after the dogs had come home, Bo sat on the porch watching the sunset. Emma was at the store closing up. The dogs were at his feet, Nellie, Scout and Hope, who was growing into his paws, and his name both. He thought about the past year, about everything they'd been through. The grief and the fighting, the nearly losing and the barely winning. The slow process of rebuilding what had been broken. It hadn't been easy. Some days it still wasn't easy, but they'd done it. Together, they'd done it. A truck pulled up and Emma climbed out carrying bags of groceries. She'd put on weight, healthy weight, and her smile came easier now. She looked like Sarah had at that age, full of purpose and contentment. "Thought we'd make that chicken recipe tonight," she called. "The one Mom used to make on special occasions?" "What's the occasion?" Bo asked. Emma climbed the porch steps, set down the groceries, and pulled out a document from her bag. This came certified mail to the store. Addressed to both of us. Bo took it, read through the official language. It was from the bank, formally acknowledging that their mortgage was current, all payments up to date. There was a note attached from the bank manager. "In recognition of your family's contribution to our community's heritage and in consideration of recent hardships, we are pleased to inform you that local investors have established a fund that has paid off the remaining balance of your mortgage. The McCrae property is now yours, free and clear." Bo read it twice, unable to process it at first. The mortgage paid off. The cabin and land truly theirs with no debt hanging over them. Who? He managed? Anonymous donors, the letter says. But I'd bet it's everyone. Martha, Frank, Tom, Dr. Hayes, all the people who helped us fight, who believed this place was worth saving. Emma's voice shook. They wanted to make sure we'd never have to worry about losing it again. Bo couldn't speak. The weight he'd been carrying for so long, the fear of foreclosure and loss, lifted completely. He pulled Emma into a hug, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. That evening, they cooked Sarah's chicken recipe together. They ate on the porch as the stars came out. The dogs settled around them. Bo played his harmonica, the notes carrying across the prairie. And Emma told stories about her mother, memories that made them both smile instead of ache. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Bo stood in the yard looking up at the massive Montana sky. The stars were impossibly bright out here, away from city lights, just like they'd always been. "We made it, Sarah," he said quietly to the night, to the stars, to wherever she was. The dogs came home. Emma came home. "We're going to be okay," the wind whispered through the grass, and Bo chose to believe it was Sarah's answer. Chosen to believe she knew, wherever she was, that the family she'd loved so fiercely had found its way back together. Inside the cabin, Nellie and Scout slept peacefully. Hope was curled up on Emma's bed, already choosing his person. The quilt with Sarah's initials lay folded on the chair. The recipe cards sat in their box on the shelf. The harmonica rested on the porch rail, ready for tomorrow's music. This was home. Not perfect, not without scars and grief and the memory of all they'd lost. But home nonetheless, a place where love had deep roots, where family meant showing up even when it was hard, where loyalty was measured not in convenience, but in the miles traveled to get back to where you belonged. Bo McCrae, 63 years old now, walked back to his cabin with a lightness in his step that had been absent for 4 years. He checked on the dogs one more time, looked in on Emma sleeping soundly in her room, then settled into his own bed, with Sarah's quilt pulled up around him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be work at the ranch, bills to pay, a store to run, animals to care for. But they'd face it together, as family should, as Sarah would have wanted. As 3 loyal dogs had somehow known they needed to. Sometimes the longest journey is the one back home. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a beginning wearing a different face. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very stubborn and very loved, you get a second chance to rebuild what grief tried to destroy. Bo closed his eyes and slept peacefully. The weight of fear and debt and loneliness finally lifted. In the morning, there would be coffee and dogs and Emma's laugh. There would be sunrise over the prairie and work to do and a life to live. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.